Welcome to the Above and Beyond Recovery Podcast, where we explore recovery and its relationship to faith, family, work, community, and health.
Well, hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us today again on another episode of Above and Beyond. And we appreciate you joining us. So today, our topic in this episode is going to cover homelessness and addiction. And we've got some great guests with us today. Let me introduce them to you now. Rob Turchi, who is the CEO of Hope Rescue Mission in Reading, Pennsylvania. We've been friends for quite a while. I don't know if he'll want to admit that or not, but we have been. And Rob is just a gifted leader. He's a very passionate man, not only for his family and for God, but certainly for helping the homeless situation and in Reading and beyond, I'm sure. So we're looking forward to hearing from him. We also have a guest with us today, Keith Bellus, who is a case manager. And we're going to learn not only what a case manager is, but we're going to hear Keith's story, which is a powerful story and demonstrates kind of the fruit and the pouring of the ministries like Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge as well. Certainly in this case, Hope Rescue Mission. So we are excited to have you guys and thrilled that you took the time to be with us today. And I know our listeners are going to be blessed. So thanks for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure to be here.
You bet. Well, it really is great to have you guys today, and thank you so much. I know you guys have busy schedules, and so thank you for taking the time, and I know our listeners will appreciate your insights. But before we dive into homelessness and addiction and how those things sometimes go hand in hand, I'd love for our listeners to get to know who you are. We all have a story, and our story matters to God. It certainly impacts other people. And so we talked about Keith. I guess we'll start with you. Keith Bellus is a case manager. So maybe tell us your story. I know here at PATC, we hear incredible stories. And I think I referenced you in this way. I think about the men and women that are a part of our program. I often say to them, you're a trophy of God's grace. And as I'm sure as our listeners hear your story, we're going to reflect on that. So tell us a little bit about how you ended up being a case manager there, but more importantly, your story of what's brought you to this place.
Well, we're talking about homelessness and addiction, oddly enough, and that is what God used to shape who I am and where I'm at today. I spent 22 years in active addiction. And it was just, to be honest with you, it's a real hazy part of my life, and you don't really realize it until you get out of it. But that ended ultimately in incarceration. I was at Berks County Prison in between there and Montgomery for about 11 and a half months, after which it had been my first long stint of time sober. And, it was by choice because those types of things are available in jail. But I was able to find God and start seeking who he was. I had like a taste for it. And
so you didn't grow up in the faith or in church, or?
We did, but it wasn't like it is now. I knew of God. I didn't know God. So as God worked in my life, he brought me out of jail and put me in the Hope Rescue Mission. I had nowhere else to go, really, and they were the only ones that opened their door to me.
Where are you from originally?
I'm from Douglasville, Birdsboro area. I've been all over, but that's where I spent the vast majority of my childhood. But I bounced around a whole bunch. So where I'm at now is actually the longest I've ever been in one solid place, stability, and that's something God's blessed me with.
So you spent time in a homeless situation?
Absolutely. I spent 703 days at the Hope Rescue Mission in between incarceration and my permanent house that I have now.
And so when did you first hear about the Hope Rescue Mission?
Actually, when I was locked up. A lot of guys that go through the revolving door of the criminal justice system end up at the Hope Rescue Mission as a home plan. So I had heard from these guys, and I suggested it to my parole officer, I suppose, and she okayed it, and that's where I went.
And so talk a little bit in your story about how, because again, today we're talking about how homelessness and addiction often, not always, but often go hand in hand. How did the addiction side work? Because a lot of our listeners, obviously, when you think about, adult and teen challenge here in Pennsylvania, they're focused on the addiction piece. But how did you deal with the addiction side of your story?
Dealing with addiction was something that I couldn't really do until I had my basic needs taken care of. It's not something that you really think of. You're worried about where you're going to sleep and what you're going to eat. So addressing those needs really wasn't something that I was looking at. I don't know if you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but those basic psychosocial needs are something that you need to address before you can start looking at safety needs like housing, and then you start looking at like love and kindness and relationships.
Yeah, so just to unpack that a little bit, that's really interesting to hear you say that. But what if your addiction is driving so hard that it really is impacting you getting food to eat? I guess there are levels of addiction, just like there's a hierarchy and other things in life. Where would you say your addiction fit into that?
My addiction took precedence over everything. It was the first thing I thought of. And you still care about your family. You still love your children. But until you get high, it doesn't matter. It matters once you get there, and you worry about all those things. But
so you get to Hope Rescue Mission when? When did you come there?
I came there December 24th, 2018.
And you remember your first day there?
Absolutely.
Well, tell us about it.
I was terrified. I'd just come out of jail, and I'd never been home or in a homeless shelter before. I had spent time on the streets and in hotels and in my car and all that kinds of stuff. But I was terrified of the types of people. I guess there's a stigma around going to.
Well, we're going to talk about that. So listeners, keep that thought in mind. There's a stigma with addiction for sure, but there's a stigma with homelessness too. And so we're going to talk about that. So you came in scared. What did you find?
Not what I was expecting. A lot. You tend to categorize groups of people that you don't understand before ever meeting them, and when you get to be a part of that community, you realize that people are people no matter where you go.
That's a great thought. People are people no matter where you go. I always say, people talk about being dysfunctional. Well, I think everyone's dysfunctional, especially once you get to know them. Like, who isn't at some level? We live in a fallen world, right? We're fallen creatures. So you didn't find what you thought you might. What did you find at Hope Rescue Mission?
I found a family. People, I never had much of one growing up, and it was always fair weather friends through the most of my life, and I came to people that really cared about me, and I was skeptical about it at first, but time tells. And there's people that I trust more than blood to have my back and have my best interests, and sometimes just to talk to about problems that I'm having in my life, which are pretty good problems compared to what they used to be. But
yeah, right.
It's just great to be able to talk to somebody. I often will fill Rob in on what's going on in my life, and we'll talk about different things. I really do love the people I work with. It's more than just a job.
Right. Well, that's good. That's another great thought. So let's talk about that. What? So you became? Was that your first role, case manager, or did you have another role?
No. I'd had actually started out there on support staff, which is a group of guys who just go through belongings, scan them through the metal detector. We'll do pack-ups, urine tests, all the kinds of fun stuff. And then I eventually worked my way to the front desk, where I eventually became a lead. Yeah. And I was running a team there for the better part of a year. And they had made some changes in case management. They decided to make an intake coordinator position. And after about 6 months of that being a thing, the position, opened up, and they welcomed me into case management as a intake coordinator. And for the better part of a year after that, I was doing intakes for guys. I was the first face they got to see, so I could say, hey, I know exactly what it's like.
And what a comforting thought to someone coming in for the first time, maybe who's also scared, has a stigma about what they're doing. And and so kind of just to wrap up, we're going to come back to your story, I'm sure, as we talk, but explain to our listeners, what do you do as a case manager? What is that role?
Oh, as a case manager, I resource for them. I help get them into treatment if need be. I help find housing for them. I get medication straightened out. I get food stamps, Medicaid, whatever their needs are. I figure out how to meet them.
And how many individuals are on your caseload?
Anywhere from 35 to 40. It depends on our census, but.
Well, Keith, that's awesome, and thank you for sharing your story. I think it just provides safety. You know, when you hear someone talking authentically about their life, and we're going to get back to your story, especially when we think about stigma. But Rob, man, it really is. I have appreciated our friendship. I don't know how many years we've known each other, but it seems like forever. Probably a short time after you became the leader of Hope Rescue Mission. But I really would love our listeners to hear more of your story. Rob's a great family man. First of all, he's a great follower of Christ. And just there's a lot of good stuff about your story. So why don't you share with our listeners how you got where you are today?
It almost seems like by accident, you know. I think a lot of times when I think about my life, I don't really know what God's up to, and I don't really know what's upcoming. But when I look in the rearview mirror, I see His sovereign hand and how He worked things out. Amen. And that's really throughout my entire life, you know, figuring things out, you know, looking back on what He's done. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, then moved after high school to Philadelphia, went to Bible college, grew up outside the church, always believing that God existed, but never knowing anything about Him. So when I started going to church and put my faith in Christ, the idea of going to Bible college and making my life about serving God was really what was most on my heart. So then after Bible college, I made the, I think, next logical step of going into the criminal justice system. And so that was a bit of a
Really, you think just I was going to say, so that was that you were joking with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because people ask me, like, how do you go from being a professional baseball player to preacher? So when I heard you say that, because I kind of know your sense of humor, which I love, by the way. Yeah, so from Bible college to police work and criminal justice. So
well, when I was in college, I spent some summers in Mexico and doing missions work, and I really thought that I'd be a missionary. And I worked for the college on the overnight security, which was a great job because you got to do your studies all night.
yeah, right.
But the chief of that security department was a retired FBI agent. So he was really talking to us about how the field of law enforcement really needs believers. And so that, I think, was my catalyst, him speaking into my life. And I almost went into customs and immigration, being fluent in Spanish.
Yeah, one of the stories, like when I first met Rob, just talking to him, hearing part of his story like you're hearing today, he just like put out some incredible Spanish. I'm like, where in the, that was like one of the things you just don't expect. So how did you become so, fluent in Spanish?
Well, I always had a interest in languages. You know, my family's from Italy, but ironically I speak way more Spanish. But always growing up, would always want to learn, as many Italian words as I could. When I became a follower of Christ, I really had a burden for reaching those in need.
Gotcha.
In, whatever community I found myself in. And then after a missions trip to Mexico with a youth ministry, that really ignited in me. I really want to be able to communicate with as many people as possible about the gospel.
Right.
So another language is like a key. You can open up relationships and understand their culture. And
I'm sure in your ministry now, I mean, how beneficial is it now?
Unbelievable. I mean, Reading, I think, is at least 72% Hispanic, because there's men from numerous different countries, originally at the mission. So I all the time am learning new Spanish and new slang words and colloquialism.
So back to the story. So how long were you doing criminal justice and police work?
I was doing that for close to 10 years, and then went into pastoral role as an associate pastor at our church in Philadelphia, and did that for several years. And then my wife and I had 4 sons in 4 years, including twins. And my wife grew up in Lima, Peru, a really huge city. And so we just really wanted to raise our kids different than we were raised. And so we bought a farm in Ole, Pennsylvania. And so 12 years ago, moved out to Berks County. And I took a job as a sergeant at Berks County Prison, and thought that I would work for the county, but didn't feel peace. So I was planning on going into Reading Police Academy. And right before I went to become a Reading police officer, I heard about this place called Hope Rescue Mission.
Okay.
So kind of stumbled upon this neat ministry and fell in love with it.
Wow.
And I really felt a tug on my heart from God to set men free, don't just keep them locked up.
Right, right, right.
I really felt that resonating in my heart. God had rescued my life and all the situations I had been through, and allowed me to study His Word in depth, allowed me to understand a lot about law enforcement and the criminal justice system and ministry. And so it felt like a great environment to be able to see it all come together.
Yeah, that's a big part of the vibe here at Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge is that freedom. So what was your first role and involvement with Hope Rescue Mission?
I was first brought in as the associate director,
Okay.
and had a wonderful mentor, but he was really going through a lot of health challenges. So the first day I showed up, he wasn't able to be there because of health reasons. So I kind of, took the reins and never looked back.
Did you have the same feeling that Keith had when he first walked in the door?
Yeah. In fact, I think I made a joke about a lot of the guys that were there that I was introducing myself to and myself all escaping Berks County Prison and finding ourselves to the mission. And they kind of chuckled about that. But I really told guys right from the beginning, look, I'm not here to play corrections officer. I am here to serve God. I'm here to serve you. I want to love you guys. So whatever you think because of the way I look or, whatever, I'm here to be a servant.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, we'll talk again. We'll interweave, I'm sure, with your stories, and certainly because I know this personally. I grew up in the Reading area, even though I moved out and left for many years. Like, the only thing I knew about Hope Rescue Mission as a kid, I wasn't in the church, wasn't following Christ, is a place where you sent your old clothes. That's the only thing I knew about the mission. And if you're not familiar with the Hope Rescue Mission, what an incredible ministry it has become, certainly under the leadership of Rob Turchi and other great team members for all these years. So we'll hopefully get to talk about that. But I'd like to go back. Anything else you want to say about your story? I don't want to just cut you off with that, but you now are the CEO, and you're like giving your life to that ministry. So maybe we'll just unpack that as we go through. But I'd like to go back because you said it on your first day, and then Keith also said it. And I know with addiction, there's a stigma. Well, that everyone that's has substance use disorder or someone that's battling addiction, well, they're this. We stop seeing them as people, like what you said, Keith. Talk to us a little bit about the misconceptions, the stigmas of homelessness and addiction as you would see it.
Well, I think if you see homelessness as in any kind of generalities, I think there's some very common struggles for those who are facing homelessness. But Keith and I were talking about this earlier. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is the individuals that you see on the street are representative of the homeless community, if you will. At any point in time, there may be 600 or so individuals who are identified as homeless in Berks County.
Okay,
several times a year, we do what's called a point-in-time count. And that a lot of agencies will go around and count up not only those who are in shelters, but they'll go to soup kitchens, they'll go out to the woods. They'll try to really get a good, accurate picture of both sheltered and unsheltered. And of that, approximately 625 people, there may be at any point in time, maybe 30 or so that are unsheltered, that are living in the woods, living under bridges, panhandling on the streets. Those could be referred to as, unsheltered, or some people call them street people, panhandlers.
Yeah, right.
I think that's the more visible homelessness. The people that you see with signs, asking you for money, et cetera, that's the visible homeless.
Okay, sheltered
That's
and
about
unsheltered. Yeah, that's
5%.
5%
of the overall homeless population. So I think the biggest misconception is the people that you see on the street are reflective of the other 95%. The other 95% look like you and me.
Yeah, and I guess that's what leads to the misconception, right? That you see that, and so you assume everyone that's battling homelessness is that. Or if you've had an encounter with someone battling addiction, then you would associate, well, everyone that's wrestling with addiction in their life must be like that. I guess one of the follow-up questions I would ask before you maybe unpack that a little further is, of those 600 roughly, in your mind, I don't know if there's research based on this or not, how many of those 600 would be battling addiction?
I would say from our statistics at Hope Rescue Mission, which is a men's only shelter for now, but opening up a women and children's shelter, our statistics are about 90%.
90% that are wrestling with addiction at some level in their life. And that would have been, I think, the assumption I would have made. I just wanted to know if that was really correct. And again, like one of the other things I wanted to ask about that very topic is, so you have homelessness, you have addiction. It many times, as based on what you're saying, it works hand in hand. I know talking to individuals here at Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge, same way, where a lot of their stories will include homelessness. Just talk about that a little bit of how you see that, how those things go together, and which one is. Do you see addiction kind of leading the way with that, and then it leads to homelessness? Like when you talk, Keith, about your story about that's the first thing you thought about when you woke up. Like, I got to fix this problem in my life and get what I'm looking for.
If one doesn't start the other is going to start one of them. Because if you're in addiction and it's something that you can't maintain. I mean, I know we all talk or have heard about functional alcoholics or functional whatevers. It's not sustainable. It's not a sustainable type of life. And that's some of the guys that come to the mission are like that, like myself. And then there's also another group of people who had successful lives before, through some form of hardship ended up losing their home or their house or whatever. And when you lose all of that, it's really hard not to look to something else for comfort, especially if you don't have a good solid foundation in something. So often homelessness will lead to some type of addiction in one way or another.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Rob, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that, addiction is a slippery slope. I think most people don't realize they're in addiction, and they feel that it's something that they can keep under control, keep hidden, keep compartmentalized, keep part of their life.
They feel they can isolate it. Yeah.
But usually, I mean, I don't know what the statistic is, but obviously being in the front of the homeless ministry, we deal with obviously individuals who that gets out of control. And I think, the old saying about sin is that it'll always, cost you more than you're willing to pay and take you places you don't want to go.
And it keeps you longer than you're thinking.
Absolutely.
There too, yeah.
So addiction, it rears its ugly head in many ways. And obviously when men come to the mission, they're, if not at rock bottom, then usually pretty close to it, where they don't have anywhere else to go, which says they probably burned a lot of the bridges, lost a lot of the relationships. And usually you find that there's a lot of trauma that needs to be dealt with.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and for our listeners, as you're listening, there is a real strong partnership that Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge has with Hope Rescue Mission. As you have a lot of partnerships. I know when I pastored, there was a strong partnership with the church and people that volunteer and serve. One of the things that you'll want to keep in mind, and maybe Rob, you can talk about it. I know you're connected a little bit with Sean Ryan. He's one of the hosts on our Above and Beyond podcast. We are here in Raresburg, a residential program, but we do a lot of outpatient work with the Naaman Center, which is a group that kind of merged with us years ago. And we're going to be working out of the Hope Rescue Mission in space that's being provided to get people the help that they need. Maybe it's a son or daughter or spouse. They just want to do some outpatient discussions. So talk a little bit about that, because I think you said something very important. A lot of people feel isolated. Like it'd be hard to believe people think that they're the only one dealing with it, but when they're really willing to take a step and say, I need to talk to someone about this. I no longer can control this. I feel like it's out of control. So talk a little bit about the Naaman Center connection we have, and then how you guys deal with addiction just from the shelter standpoint.
Well, the nice thing about working in the shelter ministry is that a lot of the fakeness and facade and denial is stripped away. It's gone. When someone comes up our 19 front steps, it's often one of the most difficult journeys they have to make, because that means I can't provide what I need in my life. I'm out of resources. I don't have anywhere to go tonight. I don't know where my next meal is coming from. I need help. So it's nice to be in a position to show and share the love of Christ with someone who's kind of beyond the show. And I would say dealing with addiction issues in individuals' lives is very overwhelming in a rescue mission. So we rely, we specialize in sheltering, feeding, clothing, and spiritual support.
Right.
We're not a addiction treatment center.
Right. And that's why I was wondering how you deal with that. Because if 90%, at least based on thoughts, is like coming with some level of addiction, how do you guys deal with it? In fact, you can also keep this question in mind. Like, I would imagine homelessness is a barrier sometimes to getting treatment.
Well, I mean, the barrier is just the isolation, the lack of resources, maybe the lack of dignity or self-care. Oftentimes, as Keith said earlier, when someone's just thinking about their immediate physical needs, they maybe aren't taking care of themselves, or taking care of themselves aren't a big priority. Right. And oftentimes, because they're in a state of despair, hopelessness, the addiction is trying to, I guess, self-medicate, or trying to help, with the pain that they're carrying.
Right.
But what we've found great success in is bringing in resources. The mission over the past decade has really opened up to the community and resources in the community. So, a decade ago, we would say, listen, you're dealing with this addiction issue. You need to go here. And we're very excited. We're very close to having Teen Challenge have full-time staff base themselves out of the lines then, if you will.
Right, yeah.
At the shelter, and be able to then be our partner, our primary strategic partner, to do those evaluations, to do those intakes, and then tell us what that individual needs based on their professional training. Do they need to go for inpatient? Are they eligible for outpatient? And then them take the lead as a partner.
And there is a real partnership, and we are really grateful for that. And it was just interesting to hear you talk about it, because I would imagine that homelessness could be a barrier, to treatment. And it's really interesting as a residential program. Some of the things we're talking about in our future, what we feel God's leading us, is that, people come here. That's the roots of Dave Wilkerson. We're in our 60th year anniversary, and he was helping gang members, which again, a lot of them, it was the violence and people being shot. But a lot of their world was addiction, just like you said, it was kind of in homelessness. And so it was bringing them here, getting them out of the city to this thriving metropolis in Raresburg, and getting to the farm, kind of like Ole, But one of the things we're talking about is, how can we bring this to the communities? What can we do? This is great. Residential program, when you do the evaluation, there's a need for that. So it's all good. Just like you're providing shelter, but like we're starting to talk about, how can we take our ministry into the community to them? Kind of like what you're saying, bringing the needs to the shelter to get people the resources, meeting them where they are. And isn't that what Jesus did?
Yes.
I mean, that's what he did with the woman with the issue of blood, and the blind, and so many. He met them, was kind of doing ministry, not locked in some temple somewhere.
And I think, we always hear about, in recovery, you need to change your people, places, and things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's very necessary. But if you can help people be in their community, not necessarily displaced, but to seek recovery and health and sobriety in their community, that way, it's not a big shock to their system when they're coming back. A lot of what we deal with is people coming back into an urban environment. Temptations are going to be not just around, but a lot of times in your face.
That's right.
And so to bring the resources and to bring
that's so good.
that to their environment, it's not such a shock to their system.
Yeah, that's so good. We talked to our graduates about that, and for years, even when I was pastoring and was on the board, and feel like I've been a part of Teen Challenge forever, but we often say it's one thing to go through the program. It's another thing when the program goes through you. It's like,
Amen.
It's like what you were saying earlier. Like I may know the 16th president of the United States was Abraham Lincoln. I don't know him personally. That's how my relationship with God was. I wasn't an atheist. I believed God existed, but could I know him personally? Could I talk with him? Did I know he really cared about me? No. And it's kind of what, we were talking about in our stories. I guess for our listeners, Keith, to go back to you a little bit based on this thing of like reentry, because we battle the same thing here. So graduates, they graduate. They've been here for detox. They've come for short term. And again, that's taking a step, which is all new for Teen Challenge, because for many years, most of the calls we got were, hey, come for 9 months. Well, when you're battling addiction, whatever, I don't know, I'm getting back to my family, my job, 9 months. So now we can help them take a step, 4 or 5 days in detox, get them the medical help that they need just to spare their life, okay? And then 30-day short-term program, and then now the 9-month faith-based where they're experiencing Christ. How did you? I know we only have a few minutes left here, but Keith, talk to us about how you process through your addiction process. Like you got the shelter you needed and those kind of things. But how did God help you win that battle?
He placed the right people in my life at the right times. And he let me know that it wasn't all on me to do myself. I think that it slowly came to me. I would say 90 days was about when the moment of clarity hit me, where I wasn't trying to think about my old life, and I'd realized that even incarcerated, look at how much better I'm living than I was out there doing my own thing.
That's an interesting thought, right?
And I really wanted to pursue that when I got out, and God placed me in the right place in front of the right people and just helped me grow daily.
So Rob, we've got about 5 minutes left. Just talk to our listeners about anything that's just on your heart about homelessness, about addiction. Maybe there's, people listening today, they either are feeling some of what we've talked about or they know someone who is. So what are some of the resources that you could talk about that are made available through Hope Rescue Mission, through the partnership of Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge, whether it's addiction, homelessness, anything that you want to share with our listeners as we wrap up?
I think that from Scripture, if things are going well in your life, if you're financially stable, there's a lot of warning. Don't trust in your wealth. Don't trust in your possessions. Don't store up your treasures here on earth. And oftentimes when life is going well, we're maybe not as absorbent or even looking to what God's doing in our life. But I think it really leaps off the pages of the Old Testament and New Testament that if you are poor, if you're in need, if you're a widow, if you're an orphan, if you're marginalized, if you are easily looked over by society, God has a special grace and a concern and a care. And there's a lot of promises that He's near. And also a warning for society in general that if you mistreat the poor and the needy, you're dishonoring God. If you're honoring and serving and speaking up for them and their needs, you're honoring Him. So there's a direct link between the poor and the needy and the hurting and their God.
In the New Testament, it says that is, we talk about relationship versus religion, but true religion is caring for people with those kinds of needs, orphans, widows, things of that need.
Yeah, and I think people ask me, well, what's the greatest need for the guys of the mission? And I think that if you ask all the men at the mission, probably most of them would say, well, I need a job. But I would say the greatest thing that men need is relationship. First and foremost, obviously a saving, redefining relationship and identity in Christ, so that maybe they don't have much in this life and that other people might look at them as second-class citizens and treat them like that, but they need to understand their value and who they are from their Creator and because of Him, regardless of the decisions maybe that they've made or the circumstances they find themselves in their life. But then also healthy, uplifting relationships. You'll find that a lot of times when individuals are battling homelessness, most of the relationships that they have are toxic relationships that are either keeping them where they are or pulling them down.
Yeah, Keith referenced that. No true brothers or friends, family. Yeah.
So when someone takes a step to come to a ministry like Hope Rescue Mission, now they have the opportunity to have new relationships cultivated in their life. Of course with God, but then with a lot of positive, uplifting people from the faith community and the community at large, potential employers, once they get stabilized. Guys have told me that being homeless really hurts. If you're in a tent in 5-degree weather and it's a blizzard, it hurts. Guys have come with frostbite, things like that. If you're hungry, it hurts. But they've said that the emotional turmoil, and Keith can share a lot of the struggles he's had, but feeling despair, not having a lot of will to live, I think that emotional turmoil hurts the most. So to have case management, support, and advocacy in their lives and to help get them back on the grid, get a photo ID, and to be able to connect with professional services. Oftentimes there's simple things
Right.
that if we just help people connect the dots, they can get help and move forward. Sometimes it's just little frustrating logistical things
Make a big
that
difference.
people are overwhelmed. They're just trying to survive day in and day out. And they just have enough strength to get through that day, let alone really make small but profound advances in their life.
That is so awesome. Well, Rob, I feel like we could talk forever, but I just want to say how much here at Pennsylvania Adult Teen Challenge we love and appreciate you guys, what you do. We're grateful for the partnership that we have together because as we've learned today, homelessness and addiction, they do kind of run hand in hand so many times. And we want to serve each other well. And so it's been great. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for sharing the ministry that you guys offer to so many. And soon will be women also will have that opportunity, just like we do here at Teen Challenge. We're now serving women on this campus. And so pray for both these ministries. We would greatly appreciate it. We appreciate your support in every way. And thanks for joining us today. It's been a great time. And guys, thanks again for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you know, one of the things that we do in every episode, because the mission of Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge is bringing wholeness to the hopeless, we talk each time we meet about a wholeness habit. What are we doing in our life? It doesn't have to be this grandiose big thing. It can just be a daily habit or something we recently feel we need to do in our lives, whether it be family, the ministries that we're a part of, or just on a personal level, of a habit that kind of brings wholeness to our life. So I don't know who wants to lead off here, but Keith, talk to our listeners about your wholeness habit.
Well, something that's brought a lot of stability and peace to my life is just having about a 15-minute devotional, not just at work first thing in the morning before I get started, but usually when we're winding down at the end of the day at home with my girlfriend and my son. I find that just spending a little bit of time in the Word and taking a minute to pause life and just really hear what's being told to you through that really brings a lot of peace and just stability to everything. It's fantastic, and it really does bring wholeness to my life in every type of way.
Rob, what about you? What's your wholeness habit?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to steal Keith's, but I spent the first 17 years of my life outside of God's Word and not exposed to it. So I would say on a daily basis, spending time in God's Word with my wife and my 4 teenage sons, which is not always the most compliant, I guess. You know, sometimes it feels like behavior modification with my sons, but spending time in God's Word on a daily basis is our wholeness habit as a family. Mm-hmm. And something a little less noble or spiritual is for about 5 years, I've been a part of a workout group that's a nationwide Christian workout group called F3. And so what I did actually this morning is we meet every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and we meet outside year-round, rain or shine or snow.
Wow.
And we meet from 5:30 to 6:15, and we do outside workouts. And then we always end in a circle of trust with prayer requests. And while doing workouts, you know, we'll share what's going on in life and
Yeah, that's cool.
relate and have fellowship. You know, it's a neat way to connect with other Christian men, and then also it's a nice way to bring people that maybe are, you know, unchurched or don't know a lot about the faith that maybe would have more apprehension of coming into a church.
That's great.
You know, try to be a light.
Well, mine is not near as profound and faithfully impactful, although I love that and love to be in the Word daily. But I was thinking about today, what is my wholeness habit? I've been doing it forever, but making my bed. And I'd love to know the research on how many people make their bed before they get up for breakfast. So the first thing they do is make their bed. And what percentage don't? Do you have a rough thought on that, Rob? If you were guessing, what would you say?
I would say probably under 10% make their bed.
Under 10%? Really?
I think so, probably.
No kidding.
Or maybe I'm just thinking of, you know, our
Yourself?
household.
Keith, what would be your ranking?
I mean, I'm going to have to agree with Rob. I don't know very many people that actually make their beds.
I want to tell you, if you're listening right now and you have access, AboveBeyond at paatc.org, shoot us your thought. We'd love to hear. I'd like to hear that survey. So hopefully, as a listener, you're developing a wholeness habit in your life, and I'm sure you are. Hopefully, even listening to podcasts has become kind of a wholeness habit for you. So thanks for joining. Those are great wholeness habits today for sure. Well, hey, everybody. Thanks again for joining us today. It's been a great episode. And listen, we certainly do want feedback. If you have a comment, you have a question about anything that our guests talked about today, if you have questions about Hope Rescue Mission, you can certainly check out their website. Give us your website, Rob, so we have it.
Our website is hopeforreading.org.
hopeforreading.org. And if you want to contact us here at Above and Beyond Podcast, AboveBeyond at paatc.org. And we always love to hear from you. If you've got topics or ideas that you'd like us to cover, make sure you send us those. And thanks for being with us.
Thank you for joining us. The Above and Beyond Recovery podcast is a production of Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge. If you or a loved one needs help with addiction, call us now at 844-888-8085 or find us online at paatc.org. That information is also in our show notes. Join us next time as we continue the conversation.